everyone. Scott Hansen here from NFL Red Zone. I hope you're checking out 1 hour of 5 Yard Rush, one of the best podcasts on NFL football in the UK.
Good morning, Rush Nation. It is almost the weekend. We had a game last night, week 2, now fully underway. And it's almost sad to have to start this with talking about a serious injury. In fact, it is sad. It is really sad to have to start off, but it is going to be the talking point of the NFL, not just for today, not even just for the weekend, I think, but probably for weeks to come. And if you haven't watched Thursday Night Football, then definitely maybe pause this or come back to it if you don't want to know what happened. But I'm not going to do as much game analysis today because I think the storylines out of the game are perhaps more at the talking point and more about what to do. I think people need, and then we can do the recap next week. So Tua Tagovailoa in the third quarter, he is going down. He's going for it on fourth down. It's 4th and 4. He's got his sort of head down, almost like in a rugby stance, and he goes into the chest of Damar Hamlin, and he sort of crinkles his neck. He goes down, he hits the back of his head on the floor, and is immediately withdrawn from the game for the rest of the game with a concussion. This is Tua Tagovailoa's 4th, maybe even 5th concussion in his career. And then on top of that, we don't know how many concussions he has had that are documented. Things that happen in training and high school and anything else that's potentially happened in his life. And I think we're at this stage now where there's some people probably questioning how can you talk about, or why is there lots of talk about retirement? And obviously we can't ignore the CTE angle. We can't ignore what has happened in the NFL over the last 10, 15, 20 years and the aspects of CTE. But what we're seeing here is an individual who has suffered just another concussion. It's multiple concussions now. We're at this stage where retirement has to be a significant consideration. It's not for me to conjecture or speculate or have any real I can have an opinion, but any real sort of science or sway on. At the end of the day, I'm not a medical professional. I'm not someone who's played the game of football, and I'm not somebody who gets paid an exorbitant amount of money to do that or anything like it. So I can't really talk about it in a great deal of confidence or authority. However, we're talking about a young man's life, and brain injuries cannot be ignored, nor can you have, you can't, it's not like your shoulder, your arm, and you can get artificial elements like your hip, where you can get surgeries done to, rectify the damaged pieces. Not that I think you should ever get to that stage, but should you make a conscious decision, I want to keep playing, and if it costs me my knee, that's fine, I'll get an artificial knee. That's an option. You can't do that with your brain. Your brain is that's all you've got. You get one. You can't have surgery to bring another brain in and fusion it. It's not there. And so with all of these concussions, and I'm not going to sit here and regurgitate what medical professionals like. Go and listen to Jesse Morse this morning and listen to how severe this concussion could be and how close he was to potentially going unconscious. And I'm really conscious of trying not to report on things I'm not an authority on. Go and listen to someone like Jesse Morse. I think he's brilliant. I watch a lot of his videos. I subscribe to his videos. He's someone I've gotten to know quite well over the last couple of months, and drafting with him and exchanging messages with. And I'm very grateful for that. And I haven't asked him about this before anybody asks. I haven't, and I won't. But at the same time, we've had injury experts on this show many, many years ago, and we talked about the importance of reporting injuries and understanding them. And ultimately, the bottom line is all that is almost secondary to what is going on right now with Tua Tagovailoa. The conversation is really, he has earned a significant amount of money, more money than he will need in his lifetime to set himself and his family up for the rest of his life. And as much as I know he will want to play, and as much as I know that there'll be an inner burning desire to play, given his age and his competitiveness and the nature of who he is. Is that necessarily in his best interest? And I really hope that this time out, he has a real think and sit down with his family and makes the decision that is right for him and for them and for everybody. Because this isn't just something that should just be ignored. This shouldn't be something that is just written off and gone, okay, well, it's a concussion. It's not just a concussion. It's a concussion on top of 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 a concussion. If this was his first concussion, this conversation would be very different. It would be, how long is he going to be out for? What's going to happen? But actually, there's a human being here who has had a significant amount of concussions, and how many more concussions can he take? And I've seen some pretty wide array of comments, and I try and stay off social media when something like this happens. But I did dip in a little bit, and I did see that people questioning about the way that he falls and the way that he does things. And I've seen people questioning lots of different things about him. And I think at the end of the day, it's not for us to question. We're not the experts. We're not the authority here. The time now is to fully give him the time to make a decision that he needs to make, and retirement should be under serious consideration. It really, really should. And how many more? Where's the line? Is the line, well, if I get one more, that'll be it? I mean, there needs to be that discussion of, if I'm going to play, the next one will be the last one, or whatever it is. I've had to have conversations in my life around illness and health, and drawing a line of where we stop with my disease, with where we stop the preventative surgery treatment and we go with surgery. And we have a line, and we've drawn that, and that's a discussion that I've had with my doctors and my surgeons, and we have a plan in place. And that might be something that comes out of this, of this is the last one to or you can't have any more. If you have one more, that's it. You've got to draw a line, and there needs to be a people and surrounding teams to do that. So that's what I'm going to say on it, and then I'm going to just sort of leave it there. I wish to all the best. I hope he makes. I mean, it's hard to say makes a full recovery. It's hard to make a full recovery from continuous concussions, but I hope that he is able to, not suffer long-term effects as a result of this concussion. What does that mean for the Dolphins going forward? In truth, this is a moving situation. To speculate on it is going to be difficult. I don't think Skylar Thompson is the answer. And I actually sent out a tweet or post, or whatever you want to call it, on X this morning. The state that this is the business case for the for NFL Europe and for a feeder league into the NFL. So 30 years ago, we had NFL Europe, and you used to have a bunch of backups who used to come into European teams in the off season and used to compete all over Europe. And it was a competitive league with people wanting to win. It resulted in a World Bowl and all those sorts of things. And it was a phenomenal thing that probably was not taken full advantage of at its time, given the reticence to American football. NFL now is what we would call it, and it was the NFL then. But trying to stay with the vernacular of the time. We're now in a state where, if that was to happen, it would be eaten up. We are in a place in Europe that if you were to bring a feeder league, it would fill out. It would sell as a concept. It would make money as a concept. It would certainly wipe its feet. I'm not saying it would be as big as the NFL. I'm not sitting here projecting that they're going to sell out 60,000 seat stadiums every week. I think they probably could, but I'm not going to sit here and say that that's a definite. However, it will definitely wipe its feet. It will definitely make money as a business. The reason why this is the business case is that people like Kurt Warner, who is an NFL Hall of Famer, people like Brad Johnson, who went on to win a Super Bowl, there are multiple players that appeared in NFL Europe that went on to have fruitful careers, that went on to win playoff games, went on to win Super Bowls, went on to have a long-lasting impact in the NFL. And that's because they got games. They got games. I'm guilty of this as much of anybody, saying that players are are crap or rubbish or not up to standard. I say this to myself as much as I say this to anybody else. Skylar Thompson comes in last night, doesn't do a good job. But at what point is he expected to do a good job? Now, it's easy to say, well, he's paid all this money. He's in the NFL. He should be one of the best players in his position. But the one thing he doesn't do is play games. He doesn't play games. Preseason doesn't really count. Let's get this right. Preseason is scrimmages that they play a number of plays and time, and that is it. Ultimately, the only way that you play well in the NFL is with repeated game time. It's why someone like Joe Flacco can come off a couch and ball out compared to a lot of these other backups, because the bottom line is he has experience. He has played 100 or over 100 games in the NFL. I don't know, probably close to 200 games in the NFL for Joe Flacco. Ryan Tannehill is sitting out there now in exactly the same situation. These guys have game experience. They have a lot of game experience. And guys like Skylar Thompson, like Trey Lance, like all these backups around the league, Tommy DeVito last season, that don't have this experience, and they're not going to get it. How do you get that experience? College is not the experience. College is preparation. But the only reason these players like Kurt Warner, like Brad Johnson, they play games. They play games every year, meaningful games every single year. And this is the argument now, that the quarterback situation in the NFL is full of all these young quarterbacks who don't have experience. And it's why someone like Josh Dobbs, who had some experience at least, has this ability to come in and do things. Now, occasionally, there is going to be someone who usurps that trend, who is going to come in and just ball out. Mike White might be the solution to the Dolphins. He was with the Dolphins. He was cut. He's on the Bills practice squad. He might be the guy that they bring in to play. There's talk of Ryan Tannehill. Ryan Tannehill's an easy one because of the experience. Ryan Tannehill doesn't fit the scheme the way that he would fit like Green Bay's scheme. But you've got Malik Willis, who's thrown 67 career passes and 0 career touchdowns in the NFL. He is going to be lining up this weekend. These players need games. They need games to get good. That's how it works. Malik Willis is going to get a handful of games, but a handful of games doesn't do it. If you had this NFL feeder league, this NFL Europe, if you don't want to do it in Europe, you do it in the US. And there's talks they're trying to make the XFL that, but with different rules and different, these people aren't part of the organizations. What was different is that these players were part of NFL organizations, and they were on a long roster, and then they were sent to go and play in NFL Europe. And they were done, and that was done so they could basically compete for their roster spot, but they would get games and practice in the schemes. And yes, it's different coaches and it's different teams, but the same way that they were affiliated to a franchise, more often than not, they did have free agents in NFL Europe, but they did have, these players were on NFL teams. So there was an investment from the team in these players to go and do that. And that is the disconnect that you're going to have with the XFL. Is in the XFL, the best players might usurp into the league, but there is no consistent communication until that happens. And so there is no development plan. There is no, we want you to go and work on this. There's no plan for, and we're in a situation now where you could have, I'm trying to think of a good example here of someone who, Trey Lance is probably the best example here. You got Trey Lance, who is not, he's played some games in the NFL, but hasn't really had a chance. And he hasn't really, with all the injuries. The Dallas Cowboys could go to Trey Lance and say, hey, we're going to send you to the NFL Europe. These are the things that you need to work on. These are these passing concepts to be good in our scheme. And these are the things that we want you to work on these jobs. Take this plan to your coach, and we'll check in and we'll work with the coaching staff and send some facilities and some money or whatever it is. And then Trey Lance can get schemed and put up in they'll probably even run some of the plays that the Cowboys will want him to run. At least there'll be an element of that. And that kind of just feels like it's massively missing. It needs to happen, because it's easy to say like Skylar Thompson's not the guy, and I don't think he's the guy. But why is he not the guy? Because he doesn't play. He doesn't get any games. Can't get 2 games here, 2 games there, 2 games here, 2 games there, and expect him to be great. You can't. That can't happen. Got to have a period where he is playing consistently, and at least if you think about when you could structure this type of idea, and I've gone well off tangent. I'm so sorry. You could start this in like March or April, and you could have it run to the summer, and just in time for camp. If these guys are going to be backups, they're going to have time in the regular season to potentially recover, but they're also going to be season fresh. They're going to get paid. They're going to earn more money. We're not talking about guys who are on hundreds of millions of dollars or tens of millions of dollars. You're not sending Tyreek Hill to NFL Europe. You're sending fringe guys, but you're employing more people. You're giving them more money. You're giving them the opportunity to earn benefits and health benefits and all these elements that are crucial to players to try and get 4 years on an NFL roster. I just think it makes too much sense. I've thought this makes too much sense for 20 years. And I don't understand how it's not happened. And I keep talking about it, and I've talked about it on this channel loads of times. Anyway, bottom line is this is the business case of enough's enough with the injuries to key positions and key skill players. We need to have a ready-made set of replacements, and they need to get games. And that's what needs to happen. Fingers crossed that starts to happen and those conversations start to be taken seriously. Let's move on to, and I'll finish up Thursday Night Football. The Bills win the football game. James Cook looks great. There's going to be some concern here about Josh Allen, not many fantasy points. And his fantasy points were propped up with his rushing touchdowns last week. But it's not that far different in terms of the passing numbers, down a little bit. But they were also chasing game. They were in a game. They were in control of this one. They could really just push back and just let the game be run out. The problem is this. There isn't, when you make significant changes to your wide receiver room, it takes a significant amount of time to get up to speed. And Josh Allen does not have an alpha receiver. Keon Coleman is not an alpha receiver. He could get there in time, but he's not an alpha receiver. Khalil Shakir is probably his alpha receiver, but let's be honest, he's a slot guy. Curtis Samuel, not an alpha receiver. He doesn't have an alpha receiver. Then you have this Dalton Kincaid, Dawson Knox situation. I talked about in this offseason a number of times, a number of different places, that I did not believe that a single receiver was going to usurp from the pack for a while. And it was going to be very flat. Now, I didn't expect the passing yards to be as low as they were last night or even as low as they were last week. That's a slight concern, but it's no different to how I saw this situation, really, other than the volume of yards. But everyone is kind of getting a piece. Like if I pull up let's pull up the stat lines here from last night, and we look at the receiving core, and it is a case of Khalil Shakir, 5 for 54. Ty Johnson, 1 for 33. Dalton Kincaid, 4 for 33 or 4 targets. James Cook, 1 for 17 and a touchdown. Curtis Samuel, 2 targets, 1 for 3. Matt Collins got a target. Valdez Scantling got a target. Keon Coleman got a target with no catches. Ray Davis got 1 for -1. Now, Josh Allen only threw 19 passes. That was not expected. But even if you extrapolate that out another, say, 10, and you split that between 6 or 7 people, no one's getting a big piece, Khalil Shakir leads the way with 5 targets. Dalton Kincaid leads second with 4 targets. But none of them have a significant target share. On those numbers, Khalil Shakir is the only one over 20%. And it's very similar to that story in week 1. And it's taking time to build that offense, and it's going to take time. It's why Dalton Kincaid was lower down in my rankings this week than the consensus, because I don't see a pathway to Dalton Kincaid being a top 5 receiver. Everyone's like, in the absence of all these receivers, Dalton Kincaid must be the guy. No, because the end goal is to improve the organization, to win football games, and to upskill these receivers. So it is going to be a case of giving the guys targets that are open and giving the team is going to be split out until people start to get to the top of the game and start to separate. And that is why it's being shared about, as well as also coaching concepts and things like that. Ultimately, this is going to be the picture of the Buffalo Bills for a while. Now, this is also a cap situation because of what has happened with Tua. When Tua goes out of the game, I can't remember the exact score, but it was pretty much done. It was like 20, I think it was 24-10. I'm pretty sure it was either 21-10 or 24-10. In fact, I think it might have even been 17-7. I'm sorry, it was 7 because Sanders got one late in this. No, it was 24-10. It was 24-10 and a half. I just had to double check. Yeah, it was 24-10. So there wasn't much scoring in the second half. It was pretty much a containment game. And that's where we were. So my bottom line for watching this is I'm not concerned in the grand scheme about the Buffalo Bills offense, but I think people need to temper the expectations of the entire offense. And they need to lower it down, myself included, before I put Josh Allen in my ranks. Don't get me wrong, I'm just as guilty because Josh Allen I had him as QB1 and he's not QB1. And ultimately, I think we have to bring him down ever so slightly. But he's always going to have that rushing upside that takes him back up to where he needs to get to. I think in this game, it's a one-off situation. I wouldn't panic in terms of the higher volume. But at the same token of things, I think we need to reevaluate how we view this offense and understand that it is very much going to be a flat plateau for a few weeks of all the receiving targets in this game. And that's kind of where I initially had it when I did my preseason projections of this offense. I did have it as a plateau. I do think people like Coleman will come along, but how long are you prepared to hold him? That's a good question. I don't know. That's down to your team's needs, requirements, bench, format, etc. There's a lot of things that need to be considered there. So that's kind of it from this game. Achane went. I was telling the patrons that I fully expected Achane to go and have a full workload, and he did. I fully expected a good performance from him, and that happened. And obviously the game in the second half is not what we would have had that injury not happened to Tua. So let's not panic too much about what happened, because, and I'm excluding the Tua injury, but I mean from the game, because when something like that happens and a freak situation like that happens, all plans from both sides go out the window. So you just need to tell me that. What do I think rest of the season for the what did I ask for? What I think in regardless to the rest of this in terms of the Dolphins moving forward? I think they need Mike White. I don't think Tannehill's a good fit. I think they can go and get Mike White. He knows the playbook. He can come in. He'll throw the football downfield. I don't think Skylar Thompson is the answer. We have nearly 9 days until we will find out what happens and where this situation goes. I would expect them to go for Mike White. I don't expect them to go for Tannehill. I could be wrong. In fact, I'm probably likely going to be wrong. I am purely guessing. I don't have any inside sources. I don't have any inside information. All I know is I think that Tua will be out for, the last time he had a concussion, he was probably out a month. And I think that's the time frame you need to start thinking about your players, is the Tyreek Hills, the Jalen Waddles. You need to plan for a month without Tua. Could turn into retirement and you got a false situation. That could happen. I'm almost fairly certain Tua will not play next week. So you're going to need to address this situation anyway. Given the multitude of concussions, they will not rush him through the protocol. The protocol will take 10 days, more often than not. He's not clearing that in 10 days. And 10 days takes him out of next week anyway. So you've got to prepare next week for a quarterback, and I think they will make a change. I don't think they're going to roll. I mean, if they roll Skylar Thompson out there, then we have a very similar situation to what we've got with Malik Willis. But if they evaluate him and realize he might be a week-to-week situation, they might need to get a longer-term situation in for the rest of the season. You could even see Tua go to IR. These are all permutations. We don't know. But I would work on the assumption that Tua is going to miss a month. That's the expectation I would be preparing for, given what we've had in the past with his injuries. And then if it's not a month, it's not a month. But that is what I'd be preparing for, is a month. That would be my strategy moving forward. Right, let's talk a little bit about wide receiver cornerback matchups. Now, I write this up for Fantasy Pros every single week. It's in edit mode, so it's not out. But I'll talk about the reasons why I write about this and the reasons why I think it's important to understand. And ultimately, it's an edge piece. I think there's lots of computation pieces of information you can put together to determine good outcomes. Ultimately, I look at wide receiver cornerback matchups to find advantageous and challenging matchups. So what I'm doing is I'm tempering expectations of high ceiling players or potential start-sit players, and I'm thinking of players that have advantageous matchups to exploit either high ceiling plays or players who perhaps wouldn't normally be on a starter radar, but might then be. Players I highlighted last week that had advantageous situations were, Rashid Shaheed and Jalen Naylor both get in the box. And then players I had on the other side to temper expectations on, that worked out pretty well as well. Deontay Johnson was someone who says you shouldn't start in any fantasy football format last week, as an example. And part of that is on the quarterback play, but part of it was also the coverage he got made it very, very difficult. So I'm just going to rattle through a few matchups where I think there's advantageous matchups. Michael Pittman against Jair Alexander. Look, I think bottom line is we don't expect Green Bay to be great on offense this week. The Colts are going to have extra possessions. Now, I actually think Alec Pierce also has a really good matchup this week. I think you could throw him into a lineup. But the reason that I'm a little skeptical on that is I think if the Colts have control of this game, like I would expect them to, and be a high point favorite, I don't think they'll need to throw the deep ball as much. It just brings risk into a game that doesn't need it. So I think they'll go with their safe pair of hands. I think they'll go with Pittman. He had 8 targets last week. I expect him to have a similar volume again next week, or this week, sorry, maybe even more. And he has got a matchup he can exploit in Jair Alexander. So that is one. And it's not a slate on any of these cornerbacks, by the way, because Jair Alexander is a pretty decent cornerback. But the two things that will go against him, one is I don't think he's going to get the rest he'll normally get in a game because I don't think the offense is going to stay on the field as much as it should do. And then the second thing is he's up against a really, really good wide receiver, and one that will exploit his weaknesses, and that will happen. I totally believe that. Another one is Josh Palmer. If he's fit, and he is questionable right now, he's up against Mike Jackson of Carolina. And again, the Carolina cornerbacks are just they're not great. As a room, probably the worst room in the NFL, or certainly up there. And Palmer's matchup in particular is really interesting. Now, he's questionable, but I do think that Harbaugh's going to come into this and go, right, we've proven we can run the football, but you're not going to go very far just running the football in the NFL. You need to pass it. I think there were some restrictions on Justin Herbert. Everyone kept saying he's 100% go. He looks 100%, and that's absolutely fine. But the one thing he didn't have was a preseason or he didn't have all of the camp reps that he would have had. So he was a little empty in the tank. And I think they'll want to stretch him a little bit this week and say, right, we want you to throw a little bit more than you did last week. It's a good matchup. It's minimal risk to do so. And I think you'll see Lamb McConkey get more targets. I think you'll see Josh Palmer benefit and get more targets. You might even see Quentin Johnston, who has a good matchup as well, get more targets as a result. And I really like Rashee Rice up against Mike Hilton. And normally Mike Hilton is one of the best sort of great slot corners in the NFL, and he doesn't concede many fantasy points per route run against him. But Rashee Rice was so dominant last week, and Mike Hilton in his age 30 season is a lot of tread on those tires. He can get beaten by pace. It's the one element that if you run at him fast enough and hard enough, you can get some success. He had Rice had a 32% target share last week. I don't necessarily think it's going to be quite that high, but I think it'll be north than 25%. And I think he will exploit his matchup. I think for me, Rice is a top 6 wide receiver, as I said yesterday in this. Other notable matchups for me, Brandon Ayuk against Shaquille Griffin, I think is a great matchup. Amon-Ra St. Brown against the rookie Tyke Smith, I think is a really good matchup. I think Amon-Ra St. Brown could dominate this weekend. Deebo Samuel against Stephon Gilmore. Again, he's recently signed. How up to speed he is, I think Deebo can really exploit that. I have Deebo as my wide receiver 2 this week. Lad McConkey, as I mentioned, against Troy Hill. Troy Hill got destroyed by Rashid Shaheed last week. I think the same thing can happen again. DeMarcus Robinson, fresh off the waiver wire ads from this week against Starling Thomas. I think it's a really good matchup for him to exploit as well. Don't be too surprised if he pops off. He should be one in all your starting lineups this week. Some of the challenging ones, Calvin Ridley against Sauce Gardner. I mean, we all know about Sauce Gardner and how effective and how dominant he is. And then you put on the back of that Will Levis' second half performance in particular against the Chicago Bears. And that's just one I probably want to stay well away from. So just be really careful with that one. Jacoby Myers against Marlon Humphrey. Again, Marlon Humphrey is one of the best corners in the NFL. He actually allows the least amount of he's targeted the least amount on players who run routes against him in the league. It's under 9%. It's quite extraordinary how little he is targeted. It's 8.6% is what he is targeted against, which is just low. The average is like 15. So it is really, really low, that volume. And so typically you would have Jacoby Myers as this PPR sort of safe floor. I just don't think that's going to happen this week, and that's why I'm staying away from it. Because if he doesn't get targeted against all that much, Marlon Humphrey, then I don't expect the train to be bucked and Jacoby Myers to get 8 targets. And that is kind of what he needs to be fantasy relevant. He needs that sort of 8 or 9 target region, and a break one potentially, or just get a decent couple of gains in there. And I just don't see them throwing the ball that way that much. You strip him back to 3 or 4 targets, he's unstartable. And I think he's going to be somewhere between there. So I'm just a little bit concerned. Well, more than a little bit concerned. I'm not starting unless absolutely desperate. And then Jamar Chase is the last one. He's up against Trent McDuffie. Now, I don't think Chase was awful last week. I don't think he was exceptional. I think he is lacking game sharpness. And that probably makes a lot of sense. He's not played. Ultimately, he didn't participate in camp, didn't participate in the preseason. He didn't look completely sharp, and that is, I think, a big piece of this. And then he's up against Trent McDuffie, who is a great corner who makes plays and is very physical, and he's hard to beat. I'm not saying Chase is not a top 12 wide receiver this week, but I don't think he's a top 5 receiver. I think he's a lot closer to 12 than he is to 5. And I think you need to temper the expectations. If you're sitting there thinking, well, Jamar Chase is my top 5 receiver this week. He is my upside, and he's going to get me the points I need. Why I mention it is that you need to temper the expectation of you're losing your upside, I think, in this matchup. And I think you're looking at someone who is a top 10, sure, right at the bottom of that, to 12, which means I think you're taking off about 6 or 7 points. Where do those 6 or 7 points come from? You need then an upside player. So going safe the rest of the roster, thinking, and the rest of your lineup, thinking you've got Chase, who's going to be your superstar, bring Chase down a bit. Where is your upside going to come from? That's the question you need to have answered in your lineups. That's why I highlight it. It's not that I'm saying that Chase is a bust. You need to sit him down. I still think he squeaks into the top 12, but I think he's a lot closer to 12 than 5. And you drafted him, don't forget, to be your 1, and you drafted him expecting him to be 2 or 3 overall in wide receiver scoring. And I just don't see that for him this week. Other challenging matchups to get out of here. DK Metcalf against Christian Gonzalez. Garrett Wilson against L'Jarius Sneed. AJ Brown against AJ Terrell. Devontae Adams again in that Baltimore matchup against Brandon Stevens. I'm just pretty much all out on Raiders this week. And Brandon Cooks, who I've probably been a little bit over bullish in my ranks because I really think the volume's there with CeeDee Lamb being out. But he is up against Marshawn Lattimore. So just be a little bit prepared. Like, I've probably gone over bold, but I put it in there because there is a world where Marshawn Lattimore, who is a great corner, as much as I don't like to admit that, can dominate. So that's going to do it for today and for the weekend. I'm going to drop something on the Patreon channel. If you haven't joined the Patreon, do join us at www.patreon.com/5yardrush. And don't forget the FFCC signups are open. Please do join us for next year. But don't forget, Rush Nation, that is it. Good luck in week 2. Land a load of W's, and we will see you next week. but keep rushing.